took a look at the calves while they were eating breakfast this morning. I figure I will start liquidating calves probably the middle of next month. That's when I believe that I will start liquidating animals. With the way that the whole business is set up, I am looking to sell about 5 cattle a month. So once I start selling them, I'll effectively be selling about 5 every month. And so yeah, I'll probably end up starting liquidations the middle of next month. And here is something that I didn't discuss yesterday. And yesterday the whole I actually figured out how to represent everything that I'm doing, more or less. It's not everything that I'm doing. And I'll go more into this about it right now, about what's actually really going on and everything. And there's actually more money. There's actually more money that is not accounted for. Okay, there is more money in the business that has not been accounted for, and I will discuss that right now. I will effectively start liquidating animals by the middle of next month or so. And the money that's not accounted for is the amount of profit that I make on top of the debt. And the amount, yesterday I was only talking about the money that I make, and the money that I make in the presentation yesterday, the money that I make would only be representative of the money that I make by reinvesting the money that I make, and if I didn't take any more debt. Okay. And the whole thing about it right now is, I wouldn't go and sell my smallest animal, right? Like, why would I sell my smallest animal? Why, I wouldn't go into my preconditioning pen and sell my smallest animal, right? And the cattle have actually swarmed me again. Everybody was just standing over there, and I guess they decided to swarm me. But the money, there is actually more money in the business. Okay, there is more money in the business, and I kind of went into detail about this yesterday too. If the price of the feeder cattle go down, then I'll have to reassess the business. If the price of the feeder cattle go down significantly, but I'm not too concerned about that. But the thing about it is, if the price of feeder cattle do go down, then my total equity portfolio would lose some money. But I'm not concerned about that. Cattle are not going to zero. Okay, they're not going to zero. In terms of how do I see things in terms of a longevity sense, I'm not in some fashionable business, right? I talk about fashionable businesses. I'm not in some kind of a fashionable business, okay? If running beef cattle was easy, everybody would be doing it. If running commercial beef animals was easy, everybody would be doing it. It's kind of a what in the world type situation that I managed to do all of this in the backyard by myself. The animal medication, the animal diet, bringing home the animals, growing the grass, starting the business, running the business. The whole thing about, I did it with barely any equipment. The whole thing about it, me having done all of this by myself is kind of a major what in the world type situation. All right. Usually when you have a cattle operation, and it's any kind of a, significant cattle operation, usually, it's like it's like the owner of the business isn't really even looking to improve the business at all, right? The owner of the business is not really looking to improve the business. They're more or less just looking to make enough money to get by. You got 5 PhDs, and on the other side, the commercially scaled businesses, you got PhDs running around all over the place. You got an animal nutritionist, you got a soil scientist, you got a business, you got a business person for the commodities, and you got all these people running around, and then you got, all the people, whatever, that are driving the machinery and checking the cattle. You got all these people running around everywhere. But, the whole thing about my situation is that I legitimately managed to do all of this by myself. All right, I effectively managed to get myself to a point where I was making about reasonably, I probably make about I probably make somewhere around $40,000 a month right now. $40,000 a month, $40,000 a month, something like that right now. And I was able to do all of that by myself to a point where I was able to actually make myself about $35,000 a month. And that is borderline like what in the world, right? I can reasonably probably get myself to about $70,000 a month without much issue. I may even be able to get myself to $100,000 a month without much issue. But I will be, but the amount of money that I make, the amount of money that I make, it doesn't matter if I can do it or not, right? The whole thing is that, I don't want to be sitting around with large sums of money. Why would I do that, right? It's not going to do anything. More money's not going to do anything. Why would I sit around with large sums of money, right? That's not something that's reasonable to do. Even if I can, whatever, I might as well use the money to do something, because money's not going to do anything. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to sit there and look at it, right? I mean, and, I can give people, I don't give nobody anything, okay? My whole thing about it is, like, if you're not gonna work, then you should then have fun being poor, okay? Like me, when I pay people, my whole thing is that, like, if I'm gonna ask somebody to do something for me, I will pay them $50 an hour. All right, that's unless they can, that's if I don't think that they're gonna be useful to a degree where they're gonna, where I shouldn't pay them $50 an hour, then I'll find somebody else. And if they give me a reason to pay more than $50 an hour, and it's a good reason, it's not some worthless thing like I just want more money, nobody cares. All right, I mean, if you're like extremely good and you deserve, or I feel like it's whatever, then I'll pay more than $50 an hour, but $50 an hour is my starting rate. That's what I look to pay everybody. And if they're not worth $50 an hour, then I go and find somebody else who is. All right, and if they're worth more than $50 an hour and they can show it, right, and they have good proof for it, they're not just sitting there going, I just want to make more money, right? Nobody cares. All right, if you want to make more money, then go out and make more money. Don't beg me. All right, don't be a bum. All right, if it, the whole thing about the cattle business is that money's not an opinion, right? I actually made it. I do very well for myself, and if it was easy to run cattle, if it was easy to run commercial cattle, everybody would be doing it. All right, and the whole thing about commercial farming is that effectively nobody even wants to do it, or nobody's even doing very well at it at all. Okay, I'm not gonna say nobody. It's very rare. Okay, I mean, but I mean, it's very rare to find somebody who's just like, what, I'm a first generation farmer. I started myself a commercial cattle business. I started myself a commercial agricultural business, and I made myself a multi-millionaire. It's very rare to see that. Very rare. All right. That's effectively the situation that I'm in. I legitimately do not know anybody else that has done it other than me. And if I met other people that have done it, I would love to meet these people. I'm just saying I have not met anybody to this day that has done it other than me. It's like, I'm a first generation farmer. I started myself a commercial cattle business, and when I take a look at it for what it is, I'm a multi-millionaire. My business, the evaluation of my business alone makes me a multi-millionaire. All right, realistically, I have such a large amount of money. It's whatever. More money's not even going to do anything. All right. And realistically, if I was looking to make more money, I would just farm more land. I'm not going to go and sell my soul to the devil. I'm not going to go and look for a buddy, pal. I'm not going to go on a magical journey. I would just farm more land. Okay. And at the end of the day, I'm okay with it. I didn't sell my soul to the devil for the money. All right. I run beef cattle. All right. It is what it is. All right. I'm not concerned about it. I didn't sell my soul to the devil for money. It's honest work. If we didn't have beef cattle, I mean, where do you think your beef comes from? All right. People are going to starve if we don't have farmers. Farming is not some easy thing. It doesn't just happen overnight. And, but the money in the business, there is actually more money in the business, and the money that's in the business. And here's the thing. Let's say that I go next month, let's say a month from today, I sell 5 cattle and I make enough money to buy 11. And you have to remember that the 5 animals that I sell, there is a margin of profit in the animal, right? It didn't, if I make $2,700 an animal, it did not cost me $2,700 to make that $2,700, right? It didn't. So there is a margin of profit in that animal. And the whole thing about the cost of feed is that I'm not concerned about the cost of feed. Because in terms of growing grass, if it boils down to it, the corn market and the cattle market are in a counterbalance. Okay, the corn market and the cattle market are in a counterbalance. Effectively, if the price of cattle go down, then the price of corn goes up, more or less. Okay, that's what that's more or less a reasonable way to look at it. And it's not 100% certain, but it more or less that's how it effectively balances itself out. The price of cattle and the price of corn are on a counterbalance. Okay, and so if the price of corn goes up and the price of cattle go down, then I can bale hay and I can sell the hay for a profit. I can graze the grass and then sell the grass as to a wholesaler, I can sell the grass, for a profit. All right, and that would effectively negate some, a lot of the costs. So if the hay market does skyrocket, corn is effectively the baseline for cattle feed. If the corn market goes up, then effectively cattle feed goes up, and if corn goes down, then cattle feed goes down. That includes hay. Okay, so if corn goes up and cattle go down, and I'm sitting there with hay and I'm grazing my animals on it, and I'm spending the $500 a month that it costs to raise my 35 animals on grass. Let's say I have 70 animals and it costs me $750 a month. Then I can recuperate that $750 a month if it comes down to it by baling the hay. All right, $750 a month would effectively grow me, about 80 bales of hay. All right, $750 would grow me 80 bales of hay, 3 times a year. All right, if I make, so that would be 240 bales. That would be 240 bales, and if I made $15 a bale, right, that would be like $3,000, $4,000 that I made, $3,500 that I made, or $3,200 or whatever it may be that I made just off the hay. Right, and that would help me negate the cost of the fertilizer that was $750 a month, right? It would negate like half of the cost of the fertilizer, and I still have the cattle, and I can sell the cattle for the profit still. And it's the whole thing about cattle is that they all go up and they all go down at the same time, okay? More or less. All right, if we ever end up in a situation where 800-pound animals sell for less than 500-pound animals, and that becomes the norm, and the animals are of similar quality, I myself will go to the sale barn and buy every single 800-pound animal that I can find. Legitimately, I will buy every single last one of them. All right, if that's what happens. All right, because it fundamentally does not make sense, right? And so the entire cattle market effectively moves up and down at the same time. The whole thing. The small animals, the big animals. And if the big animals go down in price, and the small animals go down in price too. Right? But that, with everything that I got going on, I am set to make a drastic sum of money. All right? I am set to make a drastic sum of money. Even right now, and here's the thing. Yesterday I was going through everything, but what I was going through yesterday does not include the leverage that I would be taking. And so, and adding leverage will drastically increase the amount of money that I am making. All right, because think about it like this. Let's say next month I go and I sell my 5 cattle, right? I sell my 5 cattle, so I'm effectively trading a nickel for 11 cents. I trade my nickel for 11 cents. All right, this is going to, tie into the demonstration from yesterday, the presentation from yesterday. The nickel, I trade that in for 11 cents. And the reason that I can do that is because that nickel that I traded in, I actually made it go up in value. Those 5 cattle, I actually made the 5 cattle go up in value, right? There is a profit margin, and that's also, this is a more realistic way to look at it. Don't think about it in terms of a nickel as in 5 cents. Think about a nickel as 5 cattle. Those 5 cattle that I took to the market, when I liquidated them, I made enough money to buy 11 small cattle. So I sold 5 big ones, and I made enough money to buy 11 small ones. And let's say that on my entire balance sheet, I have a 50% leverage. So if I have a 50% leverage, and I increase the size of my herd by 6 animals by just reinvesting the money, I don't know exactly how much leverage I have, but it would be less than 50%. All right? It would be less than 50%. And if I have 6 extra animals and I take a loan for 5, right, then, that would increase, or, realistically, if I brought home, if I sold 5 and I made 11, if I sold 5 and I made enough money to buy 11, I would take a loan for 6 more. Okay? So I sold 5 and I came home with 17. All right, those 17 cattle would not be producing, let's just say 11 cattle produce me 2 pennies a month. Those 17 cattle would now be producing me 3 pennies a month. All right, so, and this is also what I mean by the compounding effect, and, utilizing debt to make more money, and why I'm going to have to leverage, why I am looking to leverage against pool number 2. Pool number 2 is effectively becoming my largest source of money. Pool number 2 is actually my largest source of money. I was thinking about this. It is my largest source of money. Pool number 2 is the largest source of money. And this is also why I'm looking to leverage against pool number 2. Because when I take that money, let's say that I sell my 5 cattle and I sell them big and I make enough money to buy 11. So now I have 11 cattle. These 11 cattle are producing 2 pennies, right? You know, if I had 5 cattle, they would produce 1 penny. If I had 11, they would produce about 2, a little bit more than 2, but let's just say 2, just to make things, let's just say I bought 10 and then I used some of the money to buy whatever else it is that I needed. So let's just say I sold 5 and I bought 10. And I sold 5 and I bought 10. And, if I had 5 cattle, they would produce 1 penny a month. But if I have 10 cattle, they produce 2, right? And if I had 15 cattle, they would produce 3. So think about this in terms of the larger scheme of things, in terms of the larger picture. Think about it in terms of the larger picture. So if I was making 1 penny a month, and instead of making 1 penny a month, I make 2 pennies, that effectively doubles the amount of money. So month number 1, if I had 5 animals, month number 1, after 1 month, I would have 1 penny of positive equity that I have effectively generated by raising the animal. But if I had 10 animals, I would have 2 pennies, right? After month number 1. After month number 2, I would have 2 pennies if I had 5 cattle. But if I had 10 cattle, I would have 4 pennies. Now think about it, and now think about that for the next, 7 for the next 5 months, right? 7 months total. Now think about it if I had 15 cattle instead of 10 cattle. If I had 15 cattle instead of 5 cattle. All right, if I had 15 instead of 5, I would be tripling the amount of net positive unrealized gain that I am obtaining on a monthly basis. And this also compounds because I have more money that are being pushed through the front end of the cattle herd, right? I'm bringing them home at 200 pounds. That puts all of the money back into my business. I sell my animals. That moves the money to pool number 3. And then I take that money and I invest that money and buy. When I sell the cattle, I sell the big ones. And when I take that money and I invest it back into my business, I buy small ones, right? So, and there is a profit that is made when I sell the big ones. So that puts more money in the front end of the cattle herd, right? And so that's effectively, it's a compounding effect. And I am set to make a very large amount of money. I am set to make a very large amount of money. All right. I don't know exactly, but here's the thing, like this business, this business is so tied into my psyche. Like this business is so tied into like just my brain. I legitimately live where I work and I work on this business legitimately. It's like the most important thing to me other than God. All right, legitimately. I don't know how else to put it. My business is effectively my entire life after God. All right, God is my number 1 priority, and after God, there is my business. All right, and this business is so tied into like my brain. This business is legitimately, I can tell whether or not, I can tell what is going on with the business by just looking at it. And it's not even just my own farm. I can tell you what's going on with practically any farm by just taking a 30-second look at it, okay? I can tell you what's going on. The owner's not interested in growing the business. All right, you got 5 new pieces of machinery. You got 5 pieces of machinery, and you barely run 200 cattle a year, and you're on 200 acres, and you're barely running 200 cattle a year. I ran 200 cattle a year on 10 acres. I ran 150 cattle a year on 10 acres. All right. You can tell what's going on with the owner of the business. And my whole thing about money is that money's not an opinion. All right. And it's like when it comes down to it, I actually make money. But the whole thing about me in the cattle business is that I legitimately make money as a cattleman. And I make FU money. I don't need, trust me, whatever it is that you think your deal is, I don't need it. Trust me. I'm not a malicious person. Like, my whole thing is, like the thing about business, like honesty gets me very far in business. It may not get me very far with the moron tards that, whatever, but it gets me very far in business. And the thing, I don't sell my soul to the devil for money, okay? I don't sell my soul to the devil for money, and the whole thing about, with everything, I don't sell my soul to the devil for money, okay? I'm very honest about it. And if I say I'm going to pay 10%, then I pay 10%. And when it comes down to it, I don't need anything from anybody. If you legitimately want to go and see what it's like to be in the cattle business, and you want to know what it's like to be a first-generation farmer and make $35,000 a month, make $70,000 a month, in the cattle business, make $100,000, $200,000 a month in the cattle business, wherever it is that I end up. Today I make about $35,000 a month, and I am legitimately having zero difficulty, and my business is growing very rapidly. All right, I wouldn't be surprised if I end up at $70,000 a month in 3 months. And I've been saying, because I have actually, reassessed the situation, and I have determined that I am actually making drastically more money than I thought. I am making drastically more money than I thought. The compounding effect, I did not fully understand what was going on until I took a look at it in thorough detail yesterday. And I am actually making significantly more money than I thought. And, I thought it was going to take me, 6-7 months to get to $80,000 a month, but it may not even take me 3. It may take me 3 months to get to $80,000 a month. I thought it was going to take me like 5, 6, 7 months. It's not going to take me 5, 6, 7 months. It may take me only 3. All right. I did not fully understand exactly how much money I was making. And I'm already, I'm already in the net positive on the equity of my herd. This whole idea of, I'm not going to be selling my animals at 200 pounds. I'm not going to be selling them at, whatever. I'm not even going to be selling them at 500 pounds, right? If I was going to sell my animals, I'd sell the big ones. And I already have multiple big ones. All right, I probably already have 15 animals that are over 600 pounds. And realistically, at about 650 pounds, I've just about doubled my money. I'm not concerned about the feed. I'm not concerned about the feed, cost to feed, because I feed 90% of my animals on grass. All right, I feed 90% of my animals on grass. I'm not worried about the cost to feed, okay? If it comes down to it, if the corn market skyrockets, if the hay market goes up very high and the price of cattle go down, I'll just sell the hay to recuperate the costs. And at the end of the day, the grain, I'm not worried about the grain, because I feed 90% of the animals' diet I feed 80% of the animals' diet in grass. The 10 to 20% of grain that I feed the animals, if I did not feed that grain to the animals, I would not be making as much money as I do today. That grain puts on extra weight, and it's actually enough weight to produce a positive return on the grain that I feed them. So I don't even consider grain to be an expense. I don't consider my cost to feed is very low. And here's the thing. And a couple of days ago, I was actually talking about, the whole idea of, doing well with money, and how do you, what would I consider to be a relative gauge for doing well with money is if you effectively make enough money while you're sleeping to cover all of your expenses for the day, and the money has to be made off of an equitable asset. Okay, that's the only caveat, is that the money has to be made off of an equitable asset. And the whole idea of why do you want equitable assets is because when you have an equitable asset and that asset is producing you a return, not only are you making a return on your money, but you also have something that is worth money, right? This is something, that I go into a lot of detail about. If you're selling some widget, if you're selling a book or whatever, that doesn't count, okay? It cannot be money that you worked for. It cannot be money that is being produced, by selling something. It has to be a return on capital. All right, that's the only caveat to this whole thing. Making money with money, right? The whole idea of making money with money, the only caveat to this whole thing is, and I talked about the idea of making enough money while you sleep to cover all of your expenses for the day. And that's a very reasonable gauge for, determining whether or not your financials are in a good situation or not. All right, and there are a lot of equitable assets that you can utilize. It's not just beef cattle. There's apartment buildings. There's stocks in a business, right? Stocks produce dividends. The S&P 500, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is a good company. I think Coca-Cola is a great company. You got the S&P 500. If you legitimately want to buy bonds, you can buy bonds. I mean, apartment buildings, businesses. There are a lot of ways to make money, okay? There are a lot of ways to make money. And the whole idea, that I was discussing was if you make enough money while you're sleeping as a return on capital, that's the only caveat. It has to be a return on capital. It cannot be money that you worked for. All right, it cannot be money that you made by selling some gizmo, some widget. Okay, it has to be money that you made as a return on capital. And granted that and if you do that, And the whole thing about having a good asset is think about the asset on a long-term basis, okay? Think about the asset on a long-term basis. You really want to be in a situation where you have good assets. Why would you buy bad assets, okay? Bad assets aren't worth anything. Don't buy bad assets. When it boils down to it, your asset is worth the amount of money that you put into it. You're not spending any money. You're trading your money for the asset because the money that you're putting into the asset is worth the amount of money that you're putting into it. Why would you buy a bad asset, right? And the whole thing is buy good assets, buy them, and then make a return on your money. And a good reason, a good reasonable way to take a look at your financial situation, regardless of how much money you make or how little money it doesn't matter. The amount of money is negligible. Money doesn't do anything. Money does not do anything. And, after a certain point, and I discussed this, Warren Buffett is not sitting there in his office thinking about if he just had 10 billion more dollars, then he could go and live his dream. He's not doing that. Okay. I guarantee it. He's not doing that. This is the thing about poor people. If you legitimately think that more money is going to solve your problem, it's not going to solve your problem. Okay. If anything, it's going to make your problem worse. I can almost guarantee it. I talked about this whole thing. If you gave the average person, $250,000, next thing you know, they got a drug problem. They're drinking all the time. They went and bought themselves a better place to live. They got 3 baby mamas. They got a new car, right? It's a bunch of worthless things. Okay. This is also why, a lot of people, and I've talked about this. The big problem with most people is that you end up kicking yourself in the dick. And not only do you do it one time, but you do it repeatedly your entire life. And, and I've talked about this in terms of a monetary sense. Very realistically, I will end up making about, I may even end up making more than $70,000 a month very soon. My business is growing very rapidly. I'm doing very well for myself. I have a lot of money in the pipeline. I have a lot of money, okay? Here in about a month, I'll be selling a set of animals. And then every month after that, I'll be selling another set of animals. And they'll all effectively be going to market at 800 pounds. And I bring them in at about 200, okay? And I do very well for myself. I have a lot of money coming down the pipeline. And I will have to start leveraging against the unrealized gains in pool number 2. But when I leverage against the unrealized gains in number 2, you have to understand that the whole reason that I leverage is because I leverage against my assets. I leverage against my equitable position. And the reason that I do that is to effectively produce myself more money on a monthly basis. All right. If I had 5 animals and I sold them and I made enough money to buy 10, those 10 animals would now produce me 2 pennies. The 5 animals that I had originally would produce me 1 penny a month. But if I sold those 5 animals and I bought 10 small ones, I sold 5 big ones and I bought 10 small ones, those 10 small ones would produce me 2 pennies. They would not produce me 1 penny anymore. They would produce me 2. And those 2 pennies are technically still my money. I just have not paid myself the money yet, right? And so, you got to think about it, and if I went to the bank and I said, "Hey, banker, I sold these 5 animals and I made enough money to buy 10. Will you give me a loan for 5 animals?" And they give me a loan for 5 animals. Now I don't have 10 animals. I have 15. Right? And those 15 animals are now producing me 3 pennies a month. And those 3 pennies belong to me. Those 3 pennies are my money. They're the money that I made on top of the bank's money and my money combined, right? And so, those 3 pennies, the next month it would be 6 pennies. And the next month it would be 9 pennies. And, if I continue to do this, those 9 pennies, I would have another 6 pennies behind them. And I would have another 3 pennies behind them. And then, another set of animals behind that. I would have another 5 animals just that I have in terms of net profit from the 5 animals that I sold, right? And so I have a lot of money being slammed into the pipeline. A lot of money. All right. It's actually more money than I thought. A lot more money. And that was the whole thing. I was taking a look at what I was doing and I was like, I'm making such a drastic amount of money. I'm not concerned about I make such a drastic amount of money. It is like, it is like mind numbing how much money I make. It cannot be 15 grand. 15 grand, it cannot be 15 grand. It's not possible. 15 grand would only be the money that I have in my hand. If I went and sold my 5 biggest animals right now, I would have $14,000 in my hand. Right? There is no way that my other 30 animals only made me $1,000, $3,000. It's not possible, right? I mean, legitimately, if I went and sold my next 5 biggest animals and I sold them right after I sold my 5 biggest animals, I will still make more than double my money back. There'll be about 700 pounds. So I would, there's no way that I'm only making 15 grand. It's not possible, right? It's logically not possible. And yesterday I thought about it in terms of cattle and not money, and then I was able to reason it out. But when I took a look at it yesterday, I make a lot of money. There's a very realistic possibility that I end up making over $80,000 a month within 3 months. It's not going to take me 7 months. Realistically, it will take me 3 months. It'll take me about 3 months. All right. The big idea, and I make a large amount of money. There's a very realistic possibility that within 3 months, I'll have to be investing like $200,000 a month. But I make a lot of money. I do make a lot of money. I'm not concerned about money. Money to me is whatever, it just is what it is. All right. It's not an opinion. If you don't make any money, then you don't make any money. All right. It's not something debatable. It's not something that you make up. Okay. Nobody cares what you think. You either have the money or you don't. And a very reasonable way to look at this is when starting within about 30 days, I will be selling about 5 cattle. Those 5 cattle will hit the scale at about 800 pounds, maybe a little bit more. And there is a profit margin to be made when I liquidate these animals. It did not cost me, let's say I make $2,700 an animal. It did not cost me $2,700 to make that $2,700. That is my profit margin. And when I reinvest all of the money, it grows the amount of money that I make on a monthly basis. All right. And when I leverage against that, I mean, we're talking about I may legitimately end up in a situation where, within 3 months, I may have to be buying like 150 cattle a month. That's effectively when I will situate myself to get everything, but my whole thing about, I'm not going to fiddle diddle with the money. I don't fiddle diddle with money. I'm just going to let the pools of money be. All right. I'm just going to let the money, be where it is. And, I'm not going to fiddle fart around with the money. All right. I will pull some money out of my business. I have a strategy for how I will do that. And, but I am set to make a very large amount of money. All right. It's going to be a lot. And I already make FU money. And I'm telling you, it's going to be like, and one of the things, because one of the things that I got to benefit from, and, from to this day, and I actually wanted to stay like this, I think it would be a pain in the freaking gut. I think it would be a pain if I couldn't go anywhere without being swarmed by people. I don't want that to happen. I like being able to just go to a gas station and not being just completely swarmed by people. I like being able to go to a department store and not being swarmed by people. And, but that's one of the things that I think about. Very soon I can, the cats, but that's one of the things, me, if you saw me walking around in public, you would probably have no idea that I legitimately, my net worth goes up by millions, if not tens of millions of dollars a year. You'd probably have no idea, but I feel like, and I wanted to keep it that way. I don't want to end up in a situation. I'm not looking to end up in a situation where I can't even go to a grocery store and get absolutely swarmed by people. I'm not looking to do that. All right. I'm not, that's not something that I would want to, that's not something that I want to happen. I like being able to go to a grocery store and not being swarmed by people. I like being able to, go to a gas station and not being swarmed by people. That's one of the things about me, if you saw me in real life, if you saw me just walking around in a gas station, you would probably have no idea that my net worth goes up by tens of millions of dollars a year. You would probably have no idea that I make $70,000, $80,000 a month and, $200,000 a month. You would probably have no idea. And I like it like that. But, if it turns out that I cannot do that anymore, then I may legitimately need to even hire people to, I don't even know, cook food for me. I can't even go to a grocery store anymore if that starts to happen. I may, need to just go and buy myself like a 500-acre piece of land, and whatever, and I may legitimately, I don't want to end up in a situation where I can't, but if that starts to happen, I may legitimately need to like hire a chef and stuff like that. But that may be something I have to do with the money. That's effectively, money that's in pool number 4. I can use that money to do whatever, right? And the whole idea of why I don't fiddle fart around with the money is because the way that things are, when things are left to just run naturally, the amount of money, the amount of water in the pools, the amount of water in the bodies of water, the amount of liquidity will naturally increase, okay? That's the reason I don't fiddle fart around with the money. It doesn't matter if I have $100,000 in pool number 4. By the time, granted that I don't have some major spending problem, by the time I spend all of the money in pool number 4, it should have increased in value, right? Granted that I don't like go and immediately buy myself a Lamborghini or, whatever, going and, granted that I don't go out and immediately start spending the money. The whole thing about the pools of money is that when they are naturally just left to be, the pools, the bodies of water naturally get larger themselves, all right? Granted that I'm reinvesting capital and I'm making good investments and my investments are growing in value and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, doing what I set out to do. Granted that, and I stay right with God, all right? And granted that I do these things, granted that all of these things occur, the pools of money, the bodies of water naturally grow on their own. All right, and by the time I use the $100,000, there may be another $200,000 in there. There may be another $500,000 in there. I don't know. All right, but I have a reasonable strategy for how I will pull money from the business and how I will have it end up with a pool number 4. I'm not going to intentionally do any of, when this stuff starts to naturally occur. That is when I will. Right, that is when I will, do these things. All right, I'm not gonna pull money out of my business if it means that it's gonna slow my business down. I'm not gonna pull money out of my business if it means that it will negatively affect my business. I will only pull money out of the business when there is such a large amount of money in the business already with zero leverage on it that I cannot possibly invest that sum of money. Right, when that happens, when I am making such a large amount of money that I cannot invest all of it and it's sitting there in the business, then I will take a loan against that money, pull the money out, put that money in pool number 4, and then invest the debt so that I don't increase my equity position in my business and I can raise the amount of debt that I have, the debt percentage that I have on my business until it's about 80%. I really am looking to keep my debt at about 80% of my balance sheet. I'm really looking to keep it at about 80%. But if I have 15 cattle and they're producing me 3 pennies a month, by the second month that first month, they would have 3 pennies. Second month they would have 6 pennies. Third month they would have 9 pennies. And I would have another set of animals before them that's another 6 pennies, and another set of animals before them that's 3 pennies. That would be 18 pennies, and I would be looking to leverage against that as well. All right, I would be looking to leverage against that as well. Because fundamentally, the whole idea of cattle is that, a smaller animal is going to be worth monetarily less money than a bigger animal, and that will proportionally always effectively stay the same. And granted that I'm looking to run cattle for the rest of my life, then effectively I anticipate reasonably that the price of cattle over the next 50 years, the price of beef will go, at some point will go upwards. It will be an upwards trajectory, over the next 50 years, all right? We're probably, the price of T-bone steak is not going to be lower in 50 years than it is today, all right? That's what I reasonably anticipate. And so, but I make a very large sum of money. And when I was taking a look at it, I was like, there is no way that I only make $15,000 a month. It's massively more than that. Just to put things in perspective, and when I get there, I will show you that I'm there. Within about 3 months, I'll probably be making about $80,000 a month. Today I probably make about $35,000 a month. All right, I make a lot of money. I'm reasonably planning, to pull money out of the business here in about 3 months. And when I pull money out of the business, the only reason that I will pull money out of the business is because there's just so much money in the business that I can't do anything with it. I might as well pull it out of the business and then utilize leverage instead. And that will still keep my business growing. And the leverage will that leverage will also produce me more money. All right? But I make a very large amount of money. Very large amount of money. I don't know exactly how much I make, but it's a lot. All right? A lot.